The stench at me first. Rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic that made my stomach lurch. October 1942, and we'd been on this godforsaken island for 2 months already, but this new position felt different. Wrong. Jesus Christ, Corporal Martinez. I muttered to my squad leader as we trudged through the knee-deep muck toward our new encampment. What kind of hole are they sticking us in now? Martinez spat a stream of tobacco juice that disappeared into the murky water with a soft plop. Command says we're here to hold the line while the big shots figure out their next move. 3 clicks from Henderson Field. Close enough to the action, but far enough to. A blood-curdling scream cut through the humid air, echoing across the swampland like a banshee's wail. Every man in our column froze, rifles raised, eyes scanning the twisted mangrove roots and curtains of Spanish moss that hung like funeral shrouds around us. Contact, someone shouted, but Martinez held up his fist, the signal to hold position. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing but the oppressive silence of the jungle and the gentle lapping of dark water against our boots. Probably just some exotic bird, Martinez said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Move out. As we approached our designated area, a raised patch of relatively dry ground surrounded by the sprawling swamp, I caught sight of our new home. A few weathered tents, sandbag fortifications that had seen better days, and in the center of it all, a still pond that reflected the dying light like a black mirror. Private Tommy Kowalski, barely 18 and still green around the gills, pointed at the water with a shaking finger. Sarge, that water, it looks dark as oil. It's just tannins from the vegetation, kid, said Sergeant Murphy, a grizzled veteran who'd been fighting since Pearl Harbor. But even he gave the pond a wide berth as we set up our gear. The Marines we were relieving couldn't get out fast enough. They packed their kit with jerky, nervous movements, avoiding eye contact. Their squad leader, a weathered corporal with hollow eyes, pulled Martinez aside. Listen close, he whispered, thinking the rest of US couldn't hear. Don't camp too close to that pond, and when night falls, well, you'll understand soon enough. What's that supposed to mean? Martinez demanded, but the corporal was already walking away, his men following like ghosts fleeing daylight. As twilight painted the sky blood red, we settled into our new positions. I shared a foxhole with Kowalski, positioned about 50 yards from the mysterious pond. The kid was nervous, constantly checking and rechecking his M1 Garand. You ever hear stories about this place? He asked as darkness crept through the jungle like a living thing. What kind of stories? Back at Henderson Field, some of the pilots were talking. They said this whole area is cursed. Said the Japanese threw their dead into these swamps after the battle for the airfield, and now the spirits are angry. I laughed, but it came out forced and hollow. Kid, the only thing you need to worry about are live Japs, not dead ones. But as night fell completely, bringing with it an unnatural chill that seemed to seep up from the water itself, I began to wonder if maybe the kid was onto something. The first scream came at 11 p.m. It started low, like a man in terrible pain, then rose to an inhuman shriek that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Kowalski nearly jumped out of his skin, fumbling for his rifle. What the hell was that? He whispered. Before I could answer, Murphy's voice cut through the darkness from the command post. Sound off. Anyone see anything? Negative. Came the responses from around our perimeter. Could be a wounded Jap, Martinez suggested over the radio, but uncertainty colored his voice. The scream came again, closer this time, and with it came something that made my blood run cold, the distant but unmistakable sound of gunfire. Not the sharp crack of our M1S or the distinctive chatter of a Thompson submachine gun, but the hollow pop-pop-pop of Japanese Arisaka rifles. You hear that? Kowalski's voice was barely audible. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction of the phantom firefight. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the pond, but that was impossible. We had clear lines of sight all around that water. If there were enemy soldiers there, we'd see muzzle flashes. The gunfire continued for several minutes. A full-scale battle complete with the thump of mortars and the scream of wounded men. Then, As suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence returned to the swamp, broken only by the gentle splash of something moving through the water near the pond. "Martinez," I called softly into my radio handset. "Request permission to investigate." "Negative. Hold your positions. First light will sweep the area." But first light was 8 hours away, and as I stared out into the darkness toward that black mirror of water, I had the unsettling feeling that something was staring back. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees, and a mist began to rise from the pond, carrying with it that same metallic smell I'd noticed when we first arrived. Only now I recognized it for what it really was. Blood. The mist rolled toward us like fingers reaching across the swamp, and with it came whispers, soft, urgent voices speaking in what sounded like Japanese. Kowalski's breathing grew ragged beside me. "Danny," he whispered, using my first name for the first time since we'd been paired up. "Please tell me you hear that too." I did hear it. Voices carried on the night air, discussing tactics, calling for ammunition, crying for medics. All in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. The desperate communications of men in combat. Could be a Japanese patrol trying to psych us out. I whispered back, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The voices had an ethereal quality, like they were coming from underwater or from a great distance. At 1:30 a.m., Private Jackson's voice crackled over the radio from the eastern perimeter. "Movement by the pond. I count. Jesus, I can't tell how many. They're in the mist. Light 'em up," Martinez ordered. Jackson's bar opened up, stitching a line of tracers across the water surface. The muzzle flashes illuminated the mist for brief moments, but instead of revealing enemy soldiers, they showed us something far worse. The vague outlines of figures that seemed to shimmer and fade with each bullet that passed through them. "Cease fire." Murphy's voice boomed across the camp. "You're wasting ammunition on shadows." But Jackson kept firing until his clip ran dry. In the silence that followed, we could hear him sobbing quietly. "They were right there," he kept repeating. "Right goddamn there." The night dragged on like a slow torture. Every hour brought new terrors. More screams, more phantom gunfire, and always that mist creeping closer to our positions. At one point, I could have sworn I saw the silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the pond, perfectly still, watching us. When I blinked, he was gone. Kowalski hadn't spoken in over an hour. He just sat there, staring at the water with wide, unblinking eyes. When I touched his shoulder, he nearly jumped out of the foxhole. "Easy, kid. It's just me. There's something in that water, Danny. Something that don't belong in the world of the living." Dawn couldn't come fast enough. As the first pale light filtered through the canopy, the mist began to dissipate, and with it went the voices and the sounds of spectral battle. The pond returned to its mirror-black stillness, as if nothing had happened. Martinez called for a squad sweep of the area. We found nothing. No enemy positions, no shell casings, no blood. Just the dark water and the rotting vegetation that surrounded it. But as we were heading back to camp, Private Shun made a discovery that chilled us all to the bone. "Sarge, over here." We gathered around him at the pond's edge. There, just beneath the surface, we could make out shapes in the murky water. At first, I thought they were logs or debris, but as my eyes adjusted, the horrible truth became clear. Bodies, dozens of them, maybe more, lying on the bottom of the pond in various states of decay. Some wore the distinctive uniforms of Japanese infantry, others the torn fatigues of Marines. They lay intertwined in death, as if the final battle had continued even underwater. "Mother of God," Murphy whispered, crossing himself. Martinez knelt by the water's edge, his face pale. "No wonder this place feels cursed. How long do you think they've been down there?" "Since the first battles for the airfield," I said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "The Japs must have used this pond to dispose of bodies, ours and theirs. But why are they still?" Kowalski started to ask, then trailed off. The kid was right to question it. Bodies should have surfaced or been consumed by the swamp's ecosystem long ago. Instead, they lay perfectly preserved beneath the dark water, as if the pond itself was some kind of underwater morgue. That afternoon, Martinez radioed command about our discovery. The response was typically bureaucratic, noted for intelligence purposes. Continue mission as assigned. No offer to relocate us. No Graves registration team. Nothing. As the second night approached, we prepared ourselves for another long ordeal. But this time, we knew what we were dealing with. Or at least, we thought we did. The screams started earlier, just after sunset. But tonight they were different, more personal somehow. Jackson swore he heard his brother's voice calling his name. His brother who died at Tarawa 2 months earlier. Chin claimed he could hear his squad leader from his previous unit, Sergeant Williams, shouting tactical orders. And Kowalski heard his mother singing a lullaby in Polish. It's trying to get inside our heads, I told Martinez during a brief lull in the supernatural activity. Whatever's in that pond, it's feeding off our memories, our fears. Martinez nodded grimly. We need to find a way to stop this before it breaks the whole squad. But stopping something you couldn't see, couldn't shoot, couldn't fight in any conventional sense, that was a different kind of warfare entirely. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped again, and the mist began to rise. But tonight, it brought with it something new. The sound of marching feet, dozens of them, splashing through the shallow water around the pond's perimeter. And they were getting closer. The marching was methodical, deliberate, the sound of trained soldiers moving in formation. But as the phantom footsteps circled our position, I realized with growing horror that they were closing in on us like a noose, to encircle our position before launching an assault. Except our enemy had been dead for weeks, maybe months. At 2 a.m., the marching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the phantom footsteps. It stretched on for minutes that felt like hours, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then Private Chin screamed, not the short, sharp yell of a man under fire, but the prolonged shriek of someone experiencing absolute terror. Over the radio, we could hear him sobbing, speaking rapidly in Chinese. Prayers, maybe, or pleas for help. Chin, report. Martinez demanded. They're standing right in front of me, Chun whispered. A whole squad of them. Japanese Marines. Their uniforms are torn, covered in mud, and worse things. But their eyes, Jesus, their eyes are still alive. Light them up, Martinez ordered. Chin's bar chattered to life, muzzle flashes illuminating his position. But instead of the satisfying sound of bullets finding targets, we heard only the hollow whistle of rounds passing through empty air. The gunfire stopped abruptly, followed by Chin's terrified voice. They didn't even flinch. The bullets went right through them, and they just kept staring at me with those dead eyes. That's when I saw them myself. Rising from the pond like some biblical plague, dozens of figures emerged from the dark water. They moved with the jerky, unnatural gait of marionettes, water streaming from their rotted uniforms. Some were clearly Japanese soldiers, their rising sun patches still visible on waterlogged sleeves. Others wore Marine fatigues, so stained and torn they were barely recognizable. But the worst part was their faces, or what remained of them. Flesh hung in gray ribbons from exposed bone, yet their eyes burned with an unholy intelligence that spoke of unfinished business and unending rage. Holy Mary, Mother of God, I whispered, the prayer coming automatically from some deep Catholic corner of my childhood. The phantom soldiers spread out around our perimeter with military precision. They didn't speak, didn't make any sound at all, but their intent was clear. They wanted us in that pond with them. Kowalski started firing without orders, his M1 barking rhythmically as he emptied clip after clip into the advancing specters. Other Marines followed suit, filling the night with muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of rifle fire. But it was like trying to kill smoke. The bullets passed harmlessly through our supernatural enemies without slowing them down. Fall back to secondary positions, Martinez ordered. But where could we go? The phantoms had us surrounded, and beyond them lay miles of hostile jungle filled with very real Japanese patrols. That's when Murphy made a stand. The old sergeant grabbed a satchel charge from our demo supplies and ran toward the pond, screaming a string of profanity that would have made a dock worker blush. The phantom soldiers turned toward him with their jerky, unnatural movements, but Murphy didn't slow down. For every Marine who died on this godforsaken island, he roared, pulling the pin on the explosive. He disappeared into the mist, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the night lit up with a tremendous explosion that sent water and debris flying in all directions. The concussion knocked me flat in my foxhole, and when I looked up, the mist was beginning to clear. But Murphy was gone, and the phantom soldiers were already reforming, rising once again from the disturbed waters of the pond. The old sergeant had bought us time, nothing more, and as dawn was still hours away, I began to wonder if any of us would live to see another sunrise. The temperature continued to drop, and now I could see my breath in the air. Ice began forming on the surface of the pond. Impossible in the tropical heat of Guadalcanal, but there it was, spreading outward like a frozen cancer. "They're getting stronger," I said to Martinez over the radio. "Whatever's powering this, it's feeding off something." Feeding off what? I looked around at my fellow Marines, exhausted, terrified, pushed to the breaking point by an enemy they couldn't fight and couldn't understand. Our fear, I realized. Our terror is making them stronger. As if responding to my words, the phantom soldiers began to advance again, their dead eyes fixed on us with predatory hunger. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear new voices whispering from the dark water, the voices of Marines who hadn't made it through previous nights at this cursed place. They were calling our names, inviting us to join them in their underwater grave. By the third night, we weren't the same men who'd arrived at this accursed swamp. Private Jackson hadn't spoken coherently in 12 hours. He just sat in his foxhole, staring at the pond and mumbling to himself in what sounded like Japanese. Chin had carved strange symbols into his rifle stock with his bayonet, claiming they were protection words his grandmother had taught him. And Kowalski, the kid had aged 10 years in 3 days. "Danny, I figured it out," he whispered to me as twilight painted the sky the color of old blood. "They don't want to kill us. They want us to join them." I tried to dismiss his words as combat fatigue, but deep down, I knew he was right. Each night, the phantom soldiers came a little closer, stayed a little longer. They weren't trying to overrun our position. They were wearing us down, breaking our sanity piece by piece until we'd welcome the cold embrace of the pond. Martinez had radioed for evacuation twice, only to be told that our position was strategically vital and couldn't be abandoned. I wondered if whoever gave that order had ever spent a night listening to the screams of the damned echoing across cursed water. As darkness fell, bringing with it the now familiar drop in temperature, something new began to happen. The water in the pond started to glow with a sickly phosphorescence, and we could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Not the still forms of the dead, but active figures engaged in what looked like an underwater battle. "Look at them," Chin whispered, his voice filled with horrified fascination. "They're still fighting down there, still trying to kill each other, over and over again." The phantom gunfire started earlier than usual, but tonight it was accompanied by something worse, the sound of men drowning, desperate splashing, gurgling cries for help, the terrible silence that followed. It was the audio soundtrack to every Marine's worst nightmare. Jackson suddenly stood up his foxhole and began walking toward the pond. "Jackson, get back to your position," Martinez shouted, but the private didn't respond. He moved with the same jerky, unnatural gait we'd seen in the phantom soldiers, as if he were being controlled by invisible strings. I vaulted out of my foxhole and tackled him before he could reach the water's edge. He fought me with inhuman strength. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, speaking in rapid Japanese that seemed to come from someone else's throat. "Help me hold him," I yelled, and Kowalski rushed over to pin Jackson's arms while I sat on his legs. The private thrashed and writhed, speaking in the voice of what sounded like a dying Japanese soldier. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the possession ended. Jackson went limp, blinking in confusion as awareness returned to his eyes. What happened?" he asked weakly. "You tried to take a midnight swim," I said grimly. "In very bad company." But Jackson's near miss was just the beginning. Over the next hour, each member of our squad experienced some form of supernatural influence. Chin started digging with his bare hands, claiming he needed to bury the dead properly. Murphy began field stripping his weapon obsessively, assembling and disassembling it while muttering tactical instructions to soldiers who weren't there. Even Martinez wasn't immune. I found him standing at the edge of our camp, staring into the jungle with tears streaming down his face. "They're all here," he whispered. "Every Marine who ever died on this island. They're standing just beyond the tree line, watching us, waiting for us to join them." The possession attempts grew stronger as midnight approached. It took all our remaining strength to prevent each other from walking into that cursed pond. We tied ourselves together with comm wire, assigned watch partners, and when that failed, we simply tackled anyone who started moving toward the water. But the phantoms were learning, adapting their tactics. They began appearing as specific people from our pasts, dead friends, family members, fallen comrades. Jackson saw his brother from Tarawa, calling for help from the dark water. Chin's dead squad leader emerged from the pond, ordering him to advance into the kill zone. And I saw my father. He died when I was 12, a victim of the influenza pandemic of 1929. But there he stood at the water's edge, looking exactly as I remembered him. Tall, strong, with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of factory work. "Come on, son," he said in that familiar voice that had comforted me through childhood nightmares. "It's time to come home." Every instinct screamed at me to run to him, to finally reunite with the man I'd missed every day for the past 15 years. I actually took several steps toward the pond before Kowalski's voice cut through the supernatural influence. "Danny, that ain't your father. Whatever it is, it ain't him." The spell broke, and I saw the figure for what it truly was, a rotting corpse in a Marine's uniform, its face a writhing mass of decay that had somehow worn my father's features like a mask. The thing that had been masquerading as my dad let out a shriek of rage and frustration before dissolving back into the mist. By dawn, we were barely holding on to our sanity. 4 nights in this hell's cape had pushed us beyond the limits of human endurance. We'd prevented 3 more possession attempts, fought off countless phantom assaults, and watched our friends slowly succumb to madness. But as the sun rose and the supernatural activity subsided, I made a decision that would either save us or damn us all. "Martinez," I said, approaching our shell-shocked leader, "I know how to stop this." He looked at me with hollow eyes. "Ow, we have to go into the pond." It would be our final confrontation with the forces haunting this cursed place. I prepared for the most terrifying mission of my life. We'd spent the day gathering what supplies we could, diving weights salvaged from downed aircraft, waterproof ammunition pouches, and most importantly, a satchel charge with a timer long enough to let me reach the bottom of the pond and get back to the surface. Theoretically. "Danny, you don't have to do this," Kowalski said as I stripped down on my skivvies and strapped on the makeshift diving gear. "We could try to hold out until relief comes." "Relief isn't coming, kid. And even if it did, whoever they send would just end up as ghost food like us." I checked the waterproof seal on my rifle one more time. Besides, somebody needs to tell those dead Marines down there that the battle's over, that they can rest now. Martinez gripped my shoulder. "What if you're wrong? What if going into that pond just gives them another body to add to their collection?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with all day. "Then you boys light up the whole pond with whatever explosives we have left, and make sure nothing else comes out of that water. Ever." As twilight faded into darkness, the familiar supernatural phenomena began. The temperature dropped, mist rose from the water, and the phantom voices started their nightly chorus of pain and rage. But tonight felt different, more intense, as if the forces in the pond sensed what we were planning. The phantom soldiers materialized earlier than usual, rising from the dark water in greater numbers than we'd ever seen. There had to be 50 of them, maybe more, an entire company of the dead, Japanese and American, standing in perfect military formation along the pond's edge. But tonight, they didn't advance. They just waited, watching us with their burning eyes, as if they knew one of us would be joining them voluntarily. "Time to go," I said, hefting the satchel charge and checking my watch. "Give me exactly 20 minutes, then start shooting flares into that water. If you don't see me surface by then, we'll light up the whole damn pond," Martinez finished grimly. I waded into the cursed water, feeling the cold seep into my bones with each step. The phantom soldiers parted before me like a supernatural honor guard, their dead eyes following my progress, but making no move to stop me. The water was deeper than I'd expected. By the time I was 10 feet from shore, it was already up to my chest. At 15 feet, I had to start swimming, the heavy diving weights pulling me down toward whatever waited in the depths. As my head went under, I entered a world of absolute nightmare. The water was crystal clear beneath the surface, illuminated by that same sickly phosphorescence we'd observed from shore. And everywhere I looked, I saw them, the trapped souls of Marines and Japanese soldiers, locked in eternal combat on the bottom of the pond. They fought with the slow-motion intensity of underwater combat, bayonets thrusting, hands grappling, faces contorted in silent screams of rage and pain. Some had been fighting so long their bodies had partially decomposed, yet they continued their deadly dance with skeletal determination. I swam deeper, my lungs already burning for air, following the slope of the pond bottom toward what appeared to be the epicenter of the supernatural battleground. There, in a depression that might have once been a bomb crater, I found what I was looking for. Two figures locked in mortal combat, a Marine sergeant and a Japanese officer, their hands wrapped around each other's throats, their eyes burning with hatred that death itself couldn't extinguish. They were the source of it all, the original combatants whose mutual destruction had somehow trapped all the other dead in this endless cycle of violence. I pulled the pin on the satchel charge and wedged it between their bodies, setting the timer for 5 minutes. But as I turned to swim back to the surface, the Japanese officer's head snapped toward me, his mouth opening in a silent scream of rage. Suddenly, every phantom soldier on the pond bottom converged on my position. They moved through the water with supernatural speed, their spectral hands reaching for me with predatory hunger. I kicked desperately for the surface, my weighted belt dragging me down, even as my lungs screamed for oxygen. A skeletal hand grabbed my ankle, then another seized my arm. More phantom soldiers materialized around me, their dead faces inches from mine, their hollow eye sockets boring into my soul. They wanted me to stay, to join their eternal battle, to become another trapped spirit in their underwater hell. But I thought about Kowalski up there on the surface, probably watching the water and praying for my return. I thought about Martinez and what was left of our squad, depending on me to break the curse that was slowly driving them insane. And I thought about all the Marines who might end up stationed at this cursed place if I failed. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, I tore free from the grasping hands and kicked toward the surface. The phantom soldiers pursued me, their fingers brushing against my legs as I swam desperately upward. I broke the surface, gasping, choking on pond water and fear, with maybe 2 minutes left on the timer. The phantom soldiers on the shore had begun advancing into the water, no longer content to wait and watch. "Danny," Kowalski's voice carried across the water. "Swim, damn it. Swim." I made it to shore, just as the satchel charge detonated. The explosion sent a geyser of water and debris shooting 50 feet into the air. The concussion wave knocked me unconscious briefly, and when I came to, I was lying on dry ground with Martinez performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Did it work? I gasped, coughing up pond water. For a moment, nobody answered. Then Kowalski pointed at the water with a shaking hand. The pond was perfectly still. No mist, no phantom voices, no supernatural cold. The phosphorescent glow had faded, leaving only ordinary dark water reflecting the stars above. The screaming stopped, Chin said wonderfully. "For the first time in 5 nights, there's no screaming. We spent the rest of the night in cautious silence, waiting for the supernatural phenomena to resume. But dawn came without incident. No phantom gunfire, no ghostly apparitions, no desperate attempts to possess our minds. The curse was broken. 3 days later, a relief column arrived to rotate us out. As we packed our gear and prepared to leave that accursed swamp behind, I took one last look at the pond. In the clear morning light, it looked almost peaceful, just another water feature in the vast wilderness of Guadalcanal. But I knew what lay beneath those still waters. The bodies were still down there, Marines and Japanese soldiers who had died far from home in a war neither side fully understood. The difference was that now they could rest. As our truck pulled away from the swamp, Kowalski asked the question that had been haunting all of us. Do you think they're at peace now? The dead Marines, I mean. I thought about the sergeant and the Japanese officer, locked in their eternal struggle on the pond bottom until my satchel charge had finally ended their fight. Yeah, kid, I think they finally got their discharge papers. We never talked about what happened at the blood pond of Guadalcanal, not to the brass, not to other Marines, not even to each other after we got back to civilization. Who would have believed us anyway? But sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night thinking about the war, I remember those phantom soldiers rising from the dark water. And I'm grateful that somewhere in the South Pacific, in a small pond surrounded by mangroves and Spanish moss, a group of warriors, both American and Japanese, are finally sleeping the sleep of the dead, the way it should be.